Hello, good evening, everybody. Uh, my name is Dixon Downey. I'm with Reby Advisors. We're a registered investment advisor in Danbury, Connecticut. And tonight we're going to be talking about the CARES Act, its impact on Social Security and retirement planning. I realize it's a little bit, we're starting a little late, so we're going to try to keep it under 45 minutes. There will be a question and answer at the very end. You can type in the questions and we'll obviously try to get to those at the end and let everybody else get going who wants to get going. So before we get started, first I hope all of you out there are well, and your families and friends and loved ones are well in this challenging time. It's difficult to talk about financial things in these times, but I think we always need to kind of make sure that we have our ducks in a row. And we're going to be talking about some of the retirement related issues and opportunities created by the CARES Act. A little bit about me. I am, as I mentioned, a financial advisor. I'm not a CPA. However, we do, as registered investment advisors, cover a lot of the tax planning considerations in tax planning. We do investment and management, but we also do cover retirement planning in really all forms of planning, whether it's education, business. So that's what we do. Spent many years as a broker, and we are fiduciaries. So what that means is that the SEC requires us to do what's in your best interest and to do really what we would do for our mothers. I always say, it's the mother, do what you would do for your mother rule. So we try to follow that. So let's get started. There are really 5 key retirement sections to cover with regard to the CARES Act. And the first has to do with required minimum distributions. They've been waived this year. And so that's, for any of you who are over the age of 70 and a half, you're familiar with required minimum distributions. If you're younger than 70 and a half, in the future, you will have to take required minimum distributions for IRA accounts. That's not regular taxable accounts. Those are IRA accounts. The 401k rule, the rules applying to 401k loans have been loosened. So anybody under 59 and a half, you can borrow against a 401k and get cash. You can borrow more, basically. Also, for those who are under 59 and a half, you can enjoy what's called the coronavirus related distribution. What that basically means is that the IRS is not going to penalize you, that 72T, 10% on any distribution made before you're 59 and a half, and you can spread the income out. So we're going to talk all about this in more detail in the presentation. We're going to talk about the impact on Social Security. There's been a push off of the FICA and SECA taxes, as well as something called an employee retention credit. And then finally, we're going to be talking about charitable opportunities, both under the CARES Act as well as the Secure Act. So let's just talk a little about the landscape before we get into this. You may remember the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that went into effect in 2018. And basically, that although it did cut tax rates, it also capped the state and local income tax deduction. That's set to expire in 2026. And with all of the spending, the record deficits that we're seeing with the spending in the coronavirus bill, it makes it more likely that they're not going to extend these tax cuts. So in all likelihood, we're going to see expiration of these tax cuts. Another thing, if values are down, retirement values are down, it makes the cost of converting IRAs to Roth IRAs potentially less. So there's that opportunity. And then finally, going forward, for anybody who inherits an IRA in 2020 and later, they no longer can spread out that income over the course of their lifetime. It must be taken in a 10-year period for most beneficiaries. There are some exceptions, and we'll be talking about that. And what that really means is we're accelerating taxable income for beneficiaries. So there's some planning considerations there. It used to be that you could spread it out over life expectancy, so there'd be, you know, less income to pay tax on for most beneficiaries. That's changed now for anybody who inherits an IRA this year or later. So here are the tax brackets. I think really, if we look over here on the right, you know, we look at the married tax brackets, the 24% bracket in particular. That phases out at $321,000 in income. Quite, you know, that particularly in retirement terms, that's a high level of income. Now, if we go back to 2017 and where we're going to end up with expiration potentially, you can see that much of that last 100,000 in the 24% bracket was in the 33% bracket. So that is a 9% difference on income tax rates. So Roth conversions make sense in this environment, and they make sense for a number of reasons. Number one, the CARES Act, it creates a window of opportunity to convert traditional IRAs to Roth IRAs. The reason being is that we don't have to take required minimum distributions this year. So if it's kind of like you're on the treadmill, you're taking required minimum distributions, you're paying tax. Makes it, if you want to also do a conversion, a Roth conversion, that's additional income on top of your required minimum distribution. So you don't, in other words, you don't have to pay as much tax to do a conversion this year. And also for beneficiaries that are in high tax brackets, it also makes sense to look at Roth conversions this year. Again, because we are tightening up that time period in which to take distributions from life to a 10-year period. And also for those of us who are, you know, have a long enough time horizon, it still also makes sense to convert to a Roth IRA. I always say if we could snap our fingers, we would have all of our assets in a Roth IRA. The problem is you have to pay tax to get there. But let's also keep in mind that, you know, retirees, they depend on IRA distributions. You may just wish to continue to take distributions. You may wish to waive or take the waiver this year on required minimum distributions if you have other sources of income. So there's also that consideration. Before we get into the CARES Act, I think it's important for us to kind of also set the table here. The Secure Act, setting every community up for retirement enhancement, that went into effect just earlier this year. You know, the CARES Act, I don't think anybody was planning on the CARES Act. So that kind of got layered on top of the Secure Act. And what did the Secure Act do? Well, basically, there's a retirement savings problem in this country. The government is trying to create incentives for people to save for retirement, essentially. So they're doing things like offering incentives to create 401ks. They're making it easier to form 401ks. They're offering more options in 401ks. And how are they paying for these benefits? Well, you can make a pretty good argument that they're doing so by curtailing what's called the stretch IRA, which is basically any IRA that you take distributions over your life expectancy. So that, you know, and so, you know, we're seeing possibly the end of the stretch IRA. And you know, going forward, we're looking at IRAs subject to this 10-year rule, which we're going to be talking about more in the future. So, and not all beneficiaries are going to be subject to the 10-year rule, so we'll be talking about that as well. So that's a Secure Act, trying to help people with retirement, paying for it, unfortunately, with curtailing the stretch IRA. So the Secure Act, for those of us who are retired, also provided some benefits. You know, for anybody who's 70 and a half, it's delayed the required minimum distribution timetable a little bit. So it used to be for anybody who's 70 and a half, you have to start taking required minimum distributions for an IRA. That's now been extended to age 72. Similarly, For anybody who's 70 and a half, you can continue to contribute to an IRA if you have earned income. So that's any income that you pay payroll taxes on. So not passive income, bond interest, dividends. So you can continue to contribute past 70 and a half all the way up to 100 or 110. And then finally, it offered tax credits to employers to form 401ks, and it also, those multiple employer plans lowers the cost of forming 401ks. So that's the Secure Act. So let's get into the CARES Act. Now the CARES Act is really, it's a $2 trillion package. I mean, a lot of us are familiar with this. Here's kind of the breakdown: 560 billion for individuals, 153 billion for public health, 43 billion for education, 500 billion corporations, 377 billion for small businesses, 26 billion safety net. Quite a bit of money. And really what we're talking about with the primary driver of the CARES Act, I believe, is getting cash into the hands of people, either directly from the government, and, you know, as you're probably familiar with, there's direct payments of $1,200 per adult of a household. That phase out on incomes starts at 75,000, individual 150, joint phases out 99, 198, single joint, and 500 per child. So family of four, it's $3,400. Also another $600 a week in unemployment benefits. Small business administration loans, the PPP plan, which we've heard about, that's up to $10 million. And what that really is it's a plan to incentivize companies not to lay off workers. They get a loan. They apply for a loan as long as they don't lay off a certain percentage of their employees. That loan can be forgivable. And that's quite a significant amount of money. And they're talking about extending that. The $2 million, up to $2 million in economic income and disaster loan advance. I'm sorry, economic injury disaster loan advance, EIDL. That's up to $2 million. That's more working capital oriented. The government has also, through the CARES Act, pushed off Social Security taxes, FICA and SECA. So what does that mean? It just means that if you're an employer, your portion of payroll taxes or Social Security taxes are not due until 50% of at the end of 2021. So that's next year, and then the other half would be due at the end of 2022. So that's provides businesses some cash flow, cash support. And then again, a variety of loans to industries such as airlines, hospitals, and states. CARES Act, as we mentioned earlier, provides access to 401ks and IRAs. So let's get into this in a little bit more detail, because there's several applications here too. You know, I do have a client who's right now he's looking at buying a house and he's trying to sell another house. And you can take something called a coronavirus related distribution this year, which is up to $100,000. And basically that's for anybody who's under 59 and a half, really. But what that does is it allows it allows you to spread the income on that over 3 years. You know, primarily for people under 59 and a half, but really anybody, because you can spread the income over 3 years. But for people that are under 59 and a half, you're not going to pay that 10% penalty on that distribution. And so that's you know, one of the relief plans, retirement plan relief methods, I guess, for lack of a better term. And the second would be 401ks. You can borrow up to 100,000 now, or 100% of the plan balance. Used to be 50,000 or 50% of the plan balance. So, you know, the CRD, coronavirus related distribution, it's allowing you to spread that tax over 3 years, and that's automatically going to happen. But the idea is to provide low cost, tax efficient cash flow as a bridge really through this epidemic with these coronavirus related distributions. And, you know, you must be impacted by coronavirus to qualify for this distribution. The government basically says it's you know, if your business, you know, if you experience a business impact, or you or your spouse or child or anybody you know has been or anybody that's part of your family, I'm sorry, has been directly affected. That's the key, the trigger there. And then, you know, you're going to, as I mentioned in the prior slide, you're automatically going to owe that tax over 3 years, but you can actually file an amended return within that 3-year period to essentially treat that distribution as a rollover. So what that does is you get a refund on that distribution. And so it's a little bit technical, but it's essentially, you know, with IRAs, if you take a distribution, you're supposed to put that in another IRA within 60 days. Basically what the government's saying is we're waiving that 60-day period. So you now have 3 years to recoup, to roll that money back into an IRA and recoup that tax with an amended return. It also, the CARES Act also helps retirees. And how does it do so? Well, we talked about the waiver of the required minimum distribution this year. Now the idea here is that required minimum distributions, again for IRAs, are based on end of prior year value. So December 31st, 2019, the value of your IRA may have been higher than it is today, or whenever you decide to take your required minimum distribution. So the idea is that you're basing that calculation of the distribution based on a higher value last year, and you're maybe forced to sell at a lower value to satisfy that required minimum distribution. So that's why it's been waived. It also applies to 403Bs, you know, 401Ks, 403Bs, 457s. And if you turn 70 and a half, excuse me, 2020 or after, you wouldn't have had to take a required minimum distribution this year anyway. Why? Because you'd be subject to the Secure Act. And the Secure Act, for anybody turning 70 and a half in 2020 and later, you don't start taking required minimum distributions until age 72. So it's you know, really the CARES Act doesn't change anything for those of you turning 70 and a half for this year. But I think it is important to know that if you do turn 70 and a half this year and going forward, you have an extra couple years to start those or to begin taking required minimum distributions. So let's switch gears to inherited IRAs. We talked a little bit about this in the beginning from, you know, the stretch IRA. You know, essentially anybody who is what is called a non-eligible designated beneficiary. Now, just what we're talking about here are children, adult children, primarily, who are more than 10 years younger than the owner of the IRA. They no longer can stretch, or they can no longer stretch or take the distributions of that IRA over their life expectancy. Now that's again for anybody who's who IRA owners who are already taking distributions. Anybody who had not started taking distributions, a beneficiary would have a 5-year period to take that out. That also still applies, but now it's a 10-year time frame for non-eligible designated beneficiaries, for people that were taking distributions, IRA owners that were taking distributions. So basically what this means is that you're squeezing income for non-eligible beneficiaries over a shorter time frame, not their life expectancy, but 10 years, forcing income into higher brackets. They can take it all and spread evenly over 10 years. They can take it in the 10th year. A good year to take it would be 2025. Why? Because that's the last year potentially where we see these lower tax rates. We'll have to see. And again, non-eligible designated beneficiaries, we're generally talking about children, adult children that are more than 10 years younger than the IRA owners. Again, keep in mind that tax rates are going to expire in 2026. So you may be asking yourself, is this the death of the stretch IRA? And there's some exceptions to the 10-year rule. So what are those exceptions? Well, eligible designated, there's something called an eligible designated beneficiary. Again, this is under the Secure Act, not the CARES Act. But we'll talk a little bit about how the CARES Act can help us deal with this in a little bit. Eligible designated beneficiaries include spouse, include minor children of an IRA owner, include disabled, chronically ill. So there are still some people that can stretch, beneficiaries that can stretch. Also, there's some other strategies available too, such as something called spousal bypass, where you would leave a portion to your spouse to start and leave a portion potentially to a child or a grandchild. Why would you do that? Instead of leaving it all to your spouse. The reason you would do that is to start 2 10-year time frames in which to take distribution. So if one of the, for instance, if there's a spread in age on spouses, maybe you leave, the older spouse would leave some to a child or grandchild. That would start a 10-year window. And then if the other spouse outlived their spouse, that would, when they ultimately pass, that would start another 10-year time frame. You can also leave money to beneficiaries based on tax brackets. You may leave the Roth. If you did a Roth conversion to a child who's in a higher tax bracket, and leave the traditional to the beneficiary that's in a lower tax bracket. A variety of things here that you can do. Also, life insurance and charitable remainder trusts. There's some other trusts too that come into play that are a little too complex for today's discussion, but if you're interested, we can try to get you pointed in the right direction. My email will be at the end of the presentation. So we're gonna divide these two groups for Roth conversions to those who have turned 70 and a half in 2020 or earlier. Now the CARES Act, what does that do? You don't have to take a required minimum distribution this year. And so you could essentially, if you were taking a required minimum distribution, you could treat that as a Roth conversion this year, and you wouldn't pay any additional tax to do that in lieu or instead of taking that required minimum distribution. So again, it's like being on the treadmill. You can't stop taking those required minimum distributions. Well, this year you can, to do a Roth conversion. For those over, who are turning 70 and a half in 2020. So those are people that are born between July 1st, 1949, July 1st, 1949 through June 30th, 1950. Those are the people that are turning 70 and a half in 2020. So their beneficiaries are going to be subject to this new 10-year time frame. It's a good year to get ahead of the curve. You don't have to take required minimum distributions this year. So, again, planning for that in the future. And also for anybody who's not 70 and a half this year, who may be turning 70 and a half, say in the next 5 years, keep in mind that, you're going to have this potential 10-year time frame for beneficiaries. And I always say too that there, some people of our clients, whatever's left over is what the kids get, but special situations, family situations, if you have a special needs child, or, we've seen situations where there's a retirement home that wants to be kept in the, you want to help keep a retirement home in the family. There's a variety of different circumstances to do this kind of planning. So there are some options there. Another thing to keep in mind too with Roth conversions is that it's better to do them at the end of the year. There's no more do-overs with Roth conversions under the Secure Act. It used to be that you could recharacterize the Roth conversion. No more do-overs. So that's why we think it makes sense to do it slowly over a period of years, and also do it at the end of the year once you really know what your tax situation is at the end of the year, once you know what the market's doing. We've seen situations where you convert and then the market drops a lot. Well, you can't convert at a lower value. So a lot of different factors to take into consideration. Also, you may not want to do a Roth conversion depending on how your assets are structured. If you have a lot of non-qualified assets or assets that are just in your name, You have low cost basis stock, Amazon, IBM, or Apple. You want to get a step up in basis possibly down the road. Maybe instead of doing a Roth conversion, you just spend more aggressively out of the IRA while you have lower tax rates to do so. You don't want to leave your kids with a big tax bill, and they will get the step up, as an example. So a lot of planning considerations here. So just recapping, the Secure Act, it went into effect prior to the CARES Act, but the two laws overlap. The CARES Act, what it does is it creates a window to really plan for the Secure Act. It also does some other things, and the CARES Act, of course, was for COVID relief, and of course, most of us are using it for COVID reasons, but there are some retirement relief provisions, and that's what we're talking about here. It also extends the deadline for IRA contributions and tax filing to July 15th, just so you're aware. That's for 2019 taxes. And again, the CARES Act is just for 2020. This is gone at the end of this year. And so what we're talking about here is flexibility when it comes to required minimum distributions, coronavirus-related distributions, 401k loans, as well as we're about to get to we have two more topics, and then we're going to do a case study, charitable donations. It's increased some charitable opportunities as well, which we'll talk about. And again, keep in mind that these tax laws expire in 2026. So the two final things, and then we're going to do the case study. We're going to talk about the impact on Social Security. So the two benefits for businesses we mentioned that the push off of the FICA and the SECA taxes under the CARES Act, 50% would be due in end of 2021, the other 50% at the end of 2022, putting money in the pocket of small businesses. A lot of people are worried about the Social Security, the solvency of Social Security. I mean, the idea here is we're still going to pay, the businesses are still going to pay these Social Security taxes. So, hopefully, we're not depleting the Social Security Trust Fund by doing this. However, there's also something called an employee retention credit. That's up to $5,000 for really all businesses. And I read an article that this can be actually big money for some of these companies. We're talking Fortune 500 companies. And there's some stipulations on this credit, but it's up to $5,000, and you have to experience really a 50% drop in your business, and there's it's based on earnings of employees. So there's some hoops you have to jump through to get the credit. But I think the point here is that this is more of a giveaway, really, that we're not going to get that money into the coffers. So that brings us to the next slide on where we are with the Social Security Trust Fund. And we just got some updated figures. It's 91% funded for the next 25 years. This includes disability. It's 85% funded for the next 50 years and 75% funded for the next 75 years. Doesn't sound too scary. If you just look at the Social Security, the OASI portion, that stood at 2.9 trillion at the end of 2019. That sounds like a lot of money, and it is, but we have baby boomers retiring in droves over the next 15 years. So in 2035, it's expected or forecasted to be completely depleted, and at that point, it'll be a pay-as-you-go system unless we do something. And pay-as-you-go means younger workers are essentially paying for older workers' benefits. And they would be able to pay for roughly 79% of benefits. However, if you look at the history of Social Security, there have been a number of different fixes through the years. They've extended, they've increased the retirement age. They've offered delayed credits, a number of different things. The latest idea is, there's a couple, but one is from a Connecticut Democrat, John Larson, who's I believe is in the House. He's got a Social Security 2100 bill. it's just one idea. There's many different ideas, but what this bill does, it slowly increases payroll taxes very, very gradually over the next, I think, really like 20 years. And then in 2000, it also applies payroll taxes, Social Security taxes to high earners, those earning over $400,000 to, again, bolster the trust fund. So hopefully we'll see that, and we won't see some of the less popular ideas like means testing. But truthfully, we're not going to know the impact until next year, at the earliest. So for those who have lost a job or been furloughed, you may be thinking about claiming Social Security early. And, you know, the idea with Social Security is that it pays to wait. Full retirement age, 66 to 67, depending on your age of birth. For anybody 1954 and earlier, it's 66, full retirement age, and then it gradually goes to 67 up to 1960. And keep in mind, every year you delay Social Security, you get an 8% delayed credit. And that is very substantial, particularly, well, it's substantial not only for the individual number holder, but also for couples, because particularly in situations where you have couples where you have one earner who has a higher income record, and maybe the other spouse has not quite as much earnings. They were a homemaker, or they were, you know, just weren't a higher earner. If there's a spread, and vice versa too. I mean, we're seeing quite a few women with longer life expectancies that have higher earning records. That makes it a little bit more complicated. When they conceived of Social Security, it was very male oriented. So I've done presentations on this, so there's some intricacies with Social Security, but the bottom line is that there may be an opportunity if there's a spread between the two benefits. So if you've got one earner who's earned more, one earner who's earned less over the course of their careers, and that higher earner can delay credits, because you only get to keep, and the reason being is that the survivor only gets to keep one of the two benefits. So that's really where the rubber meets the road, is we're talking about survivorship. And in that case, if the lower earner claims at 62, you can actually come pretty close to the total benefit earned over a lifetime by both spouses delaying to get delayed maximum credit. So what does that mean? We're going to look at this in a case study. It means that it may be an opportunity to claim early. So finally, and then we're going to get to the case study, and I know it's getting a little bit late here, the Tax Code and Jobs Act. Let's, you know, that went into effect in 2018. The SALT cap, state and local income tax cap, were capped at $10,000 on state and local income taxes. And it also increased the standard deduction for those of us over 65 to $100. So what does that mean? It means that it's very hard to itemize deductions today. But there are some ways that you may or may not be aware of. And it's for anybody who is over 70 and a half and who has an IRA. You can make what's called a qualified charitable distribution from your IRA. And what that is, it's a direct distribution to, well, there's some moving parts with this too, because it's not as clear as, there's no code in the IRS language for a QCD. It has to be, there's some extra steps which we can help you with. But it is available, and you can take up to $100,000 out of a IRA as what's called an above the line deduction. Now that means it comes out before they calculate your adjusted gross income. It does not show up on Schedule A. It's not subject to the standard deduction, getting over the standard deduction. So that's something that's available, has been available, and under the Secure Act, you can take a QCD even before you start your required minimum distributions at age 72. So, you know, you can start at 70 and a half. It used to be that, you know, your RMD started at 70 and a half, and then you could take QCDs. Well, now you can turn 70 and a half, not be required to take a QCD, and still take or an RMD and still take a QCD. But keep in mind though, if you continue to work past age 70 and a half, anything you put in to an IRA after age 70 and a half comes out taxable before you can take a QCD. And then finally, let's talk about charitable planning under the CARES Act. Well, we've suspended the required minimum distributions this year under the CARES Act, but you can still take that $100,000 QCD. There's a special $300 above the line deduction for non-QCD charitable contributions. So that's anything. You don't have to take it out of the IRA. You can just write a check and still get that up to $300. And then finally, they have offered, the government's offering you a deduction of up to 100% of adjusted gross income. It used to be up to 60% of adjusted gross income for charitable contributions this year. So that's a substantial increase. And that's under the CARES Act, and that's for this year only. So you may be asking yourself, should you take a QCD this year? Well, if you've sold a business or you have a substantial taxable event, maybe better to take that 100% of AGI deduction. This year, and also you may just choose to suspend your required minimum distributions and or not take a QCD this year if you don't want to sell into a down market potentially. But the truth is that 90% of us are still 90% of us are taking the standard deduction. Only 10% of us now are itemizing. So QCDs are still one of the few charitable options that are available to particularly retired people, because most retired people have paid off their mortgages, and that's one of the big deductions that allows people to get over that standard deduction. So the numbers are even less. So again, QCDs are a very important tool. So we're going to finish here with a case study. We're going to be talking about Jim and Judy. Jim recently retired from IBM. His birth date is June 30th, 1950. His wife, Judy, she's 61. She was recently laid off as a flight attendant. Jim is going to get $3,500 a month in Social Security at age 70. He's getting maximum delayed credits. He's got a $5,500 pension. Judy's going to get 75% as a survivor benefit. Judy's her full retirement benefit, Social Security, is $2,500. However, she takes it at age 62. It will be reduced to $1,800 because you get a reduced benefit if you take it before full retirement age. They've been good savers. Jim has got $1.75 million in his IRA. It was $2 million at the end of 2019. Judy has $450,000 in a 401k. They don't have a mortgage. They have healthy savings, portfolio of ETFs, non-qualified mutual funds. And finally, they have one secure son who is an executive in the highest tax bracket, and he's got 3 kids. So this is what Jim and Judy want to know. Can Jim contribute to an IRA working as a consultant with part-time self-employment income? Should Judy take Social Security at 62, or should she wait until 70? Will Jim have to take a required minimum distribution this year? When should they make a substantial gift to the YMCA, and how? And then finally, should they convert Jim's IRA to a Roth IRA, or should they keep their son as contingent beneficiary? So Jim, he can continue contributing to an IRA under the Secure Act. However, past 70 and a half. And however, if he does do so, if he takes a qualified charitable distribution, that may be taxable. Judy, again, because anything that goes in after 70 and a half is taxable first before you can take that QCD. Judy, she should claim her Social Security even with a reduced benefit at 62. Why? Because Jim has the higher benefit. She, in all likelihood, will be the survivor, and as a result, she'll get the higher benefit of the two. Jim does not have to take a required minimum distribution this year under the Secure Act because he turned 70 and a half this year, and so he won't have to take his first RMD until 2021. And so Jim and Judy can make 100% of AGI, which is $135,000 gift 100% deductible gift to the YMCA this year only, which is greater than the standard deduction of $26,100. And with this deduction, they could use that to offset income for a Roth conversion in 2020, and possibly do that in a down market for their planning. Not only for them, for themselves. I mean, there are benefits obviously to having a Roth. Judy's life expectancy is, and Jim really together is 25 years or more. So, benefits both for them and potentially for their son. And then finally, they should explore looking at changing their beneficiary designations. That spousal bypass, maybe Jim has a big IRA, maybe he leaves some to his son or grandkids, and then the rest to Judy. There's some things you can do with contingent beneficiaries, to start those 10-year windows, 10-year time periods at different times, so that they're not being forced to take. That's quite a bit in an IRA account. I mean, at over 2 million now, in 20 years could be double. That's a lot of income potentially for their high income son. So we're finished here. We're about to get to questions. I want to thank the Lewisboro Library and Liz Gabrielle for allowing us to present this. Again, my name is Dixon Downey. I'm with Reby Advisors. 2020, it's going to be a memorable year. As always, there's opportunities. And tax planning is very specific to individuals. I'm happy to answer questions on the laws. If you have any specific questions on your own situation, we're offering complimentary consultations, confidential complimentary consultations. I'm also happy to email you the presentation. I think it's a good thing, just to kind of having, these strategies are not all addressed in some of the rules, which are just kind of published. So again, best wishes to you and your families. Stay well, stay healthy, and let's start answering some questions.